Welcome, everyone. My name is Bruce Appleyard, and I'm a professor of city planning and urban design at San Diego State University. And I'm one of the associate directors for our Center for Pedestrian and Bicyclist Safety, which is the first university transportation center funded by the US Department of Transportation dedicated solely to pedestrian and bicyclist safety. It's a multi-university collaboration uh, led by Nick Ferenczek at University of New Mexico, uh, myself at San Diego State University with a collection of faculty members there, and also faculty members at in Berkeley's SafeTrek, UC Berkeley SafeTrek, and the University of Tennessee and University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. It's Thank you so much for joining us for our third webinar, From Heartbreak to Hope, Advocating for Safer Streets Through Storytelling. And we've got a great group of people here today to share their stories and also talk to us how we can advocate for safer streets through our storytelling. Here's our agenda. So I'll first give a quick introduction, then we'll go through the sharing of stories by Laura Keenan, Barbara Toth, and Tasha Hairston Springs. And then we'll talk about effective storytelling led by Triny Willerton, excuse me. And then Amy Cohen of Family for Safe Streets will talk about effective advocacy, followed by a discussion, and then we'll talk about future webinar topics that could relate to what we're talking about today. So I'll go to the next slide and quickly tell my story. When I was 4 years old, I was hit by a car, nearly killed in Berkeley, California. That year, my father, inspired by these events, worked on the research that led to Livable Streets, which is the seminal research and work on the effects of traffic on communities and families. Very sadly, a year after Livable Streets came out, my father was killed by a speeding drunk driver. I was 17 at the time. I basically took him to the San Francisco airport, hugged him goodbye, and never saw him again. Since then, I've actually I've updated the book, taking it from 300 to 600 pages, and really focusing on pedestrian bicyclist safety, as well as his original research on traffic calming. And it means a lot to me to be here with you today with this great group of people who also had to deal with similar experiences around traffic collisions and fatalities. So please go to the next slide, and I'll hand this off to Laura Keenan from the San Diego's Family for Safe Streets. Laura, please take it away.
Thanks, Bruce. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Keenan. I'm co-founder of our San Diego chapter of Families for Safe Streets, and you'll hear more about our group in a little bit, but just high level. We're a group of families who have lost loved ones to traffic collisions or have survived crashes ourselves. I started this group, our chapter, after my husband, Matt, was killed trying to bike to the movies when our son, Evan, was 15 months old. You can see Matt here and Evan too. And Matt was somebody who just exuded passion. He made you want to say yes. He loved playing his guitar to Evan, and you can see their incredible bond even at such a young age. He got way too excited about little things like his favorite fruit pears, and he'd often laugh so hard that he'd cry. And Matt loved to ride his bike. He felt free riding his bike and prided himself on putting less than 9,000 miles on his car every year. We thought we were just getting started, and we're really excited about what was to come. But on September 14th, 2021, we had just put our son Evan to bed, and he had the rare chance as a new parent to get a little exercise and downtime. And he decided to ride his bike to the movies. And I remember saying, okay, bye, see you later. But I never got to see him alive again. I found out that about 20 minutes after leaving our house, a wrong way driver crossed into his painted bike lane and hit him head on, going about 35 miles per hour. And the road wasn't designed to protect Matt. He didn't stand a chance. He died at the scene. And I found out the next morning and had to tell our son Evan I got him from his crib and told him that his dad was never coming home again. And even though he couldn't understand what that meant at the time, this was now his reality, and I really needed him to know immediately. I also knew that Matt's death was preventable. I didn't know any terminology or anything about street design, but I knew that Matt should be alive. And now I know that had there been a protected bike lane or traffic calming to limit speeds, Matt likely would have survived that crash and he'd be alive raising our son with me. Um, we were only married 2.5 years. Last month marked his 3rd-year death anniversary. And so he's now dead longer than we got to be married. Matt was not only robbed of our marriage, he was robbed of fatherhood and Evan of his amazing dad. And Evan knows Matt through pictures and all the stories I tell him, but he'll have no memories of his own. You can go to the next slide. I pretty quickly started sharing my story because I didn't want this to happen to anybody else. And I also wanted to find a meaningful and authentic way to honor Matt. I know that Matt would want nothing more than people to be able to walk and bike safely in his community. And so that's what I do, and that's why I share our story. About a week after Matt was killed, I got in touch with the local reporter here, NPR reporter, and was able to share our story and also speak at a city council meeting regarding protected bike lanes. And I could see that my story was able to break through in ways that other people talking who were sharing data alone wasn't able to. And that really started to drive me. But then I also realized that, my story alone could only go so far, and collective voices really have the power. So I formed our local chapter here of Families for Safe Streets. And we've been around for about 2.5 years, and we've had a lot of success so far. You can see some of the news clips here, but we had our first World Day of Remembrance, which you might hear about a little bit later, but it's a day where we honor everybody killed in traffic collisions and call for action in their names. And we had the mayor of San Diego speak at our first one. We've been able to help get some quick build funding in San Diego, and also getting the city of San Diego to fund the Fatal 15 Most Dangerous Intersections. And we recently helped the city of San Diego pass a safe street resolution. And so, we know that our voices are able to break through in ways that others can't, and we try to humanize traffic violence to focus on what really matters, saving lives, so no one else has to know this pain. So thank you for attending today, and I will pass it on to the next person. I think it's Barbara.
Thank you so much, Laura. I'm Barbara Toth. I'm the founder and executive director of Vulnerable Road Users in New Mexico. The World Day of Remembrance that Laura referred to last November, we watched the sun sink behind the mountains, and then we lit the evening around us by combining the small circles of our individual candles. It was really profound to meet there, to remember those who had lost their lives. But those of us who worked together were more committed to honoring them through action, to working together to make a difference in our community and beyond for safer streets and roads. After the event, I spoke with a young reporter. She, like so many, had lost someone in a collision. Her tears were far more eloquent than words. Later on the 10 p.m. news, I was shocked to hear my own voice admitting something I'd never intended to say out loud. That I felt guilty going home that night to Jim, my husband of 52 years. I had started telling our story, and I really had wondered if it was hurtful to those who had buried loved ones to even hear our story. So many had paid such an awful price. Was it even appropriate to mention our losses and theirs in the same breath? In 2020, Jim was hit while riding his bicycle by a 17-year-old driving a truck. The crash was horrendous. He had very big surgeries that followed that, and many, many months of rehabilitation. He'll live forever with the challenges of spinal cord and traumatic brain injuries. The young man did not even receive a citation, but my Jim does pay the price every day for that young man's recklessness. He was forced to give up a business that he loved. And after years of tandem bicycling together, that's no longer something we can enjoy. And Jim's social circle is painfully small, little more than doctor's appointments. But the fact is, he did come home to me. My friend Troy found his son unresponsive on the pavement, beyond help. And Kim said her final words to her son over the telephone as he lay in critical condition on the opposite side of the country. Why was my husband still alive when so many are never coming home again? It became obvious rather quickly that with our situation came a sizable obligation to use what we had gone through to help other people and to make a difference. So I began by launching a nonprofit. We are grateful for a community which is welcoming us. We empower and equip community members to take an active role in advocacy. And I've designed an educational program for young drivers that has been very well received by those students, their parents, and their teachers. I'm particularly humbled when someone tells me that hearing our story has changed their attitudes and their actions. There have, of course, been a great many roadblocks, the majority of them staunchly held biases. People are often very angry and eager to shame and blame other road users, in particular those who walk or ride bicycles. And a great many people refuse to believe that change is even possible. They believe that death and destruction on our roadways is inevitable. We know, and others who have gathered with us, that roadway violence is preventable. There are proven strategies. They can be employed to safely serve everyone in our community, regardless of how they get around. Just last year across the US, nearly 41,000 people had their lives stolen on US roadways. Countless others were seriously injured, forced to sacrifice quality of life, some in ways that defy description. Survivors, and we who help care for them, are often unseen and unheard. I have come to a more intimate understanding of grief, and with it, my feelings of guilt have lessened somewhat. It's impossible to compare or quantify grief. And of course, loss is universal, but the journey it sends us on is unique. My journey and that of my husband, Jim, has brought us to this time and place for a purpose. So this year, we'll light the candles. We'll illuminate the faces of friends and family members as we stand together, united in our determination to end senseless roadway violence. It can be done. We have a specific plan for our own city officials. We're going to insist that they follow through. We're going to keep insisting until they make the appropriate policy changes, not just making changes, but really putting wheels under those changes. Having stood together in the light, we'll settle for nothing less. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara.
Hello, my name is Tasha Hairston Springs. I'm the CEO and founder of Mindfully Aware Driving Solutions. I call it MAD Solutions for short. And I'm the creator of the MAD Method, which is a 21-day mindfulness program designed to break the deadly habit of driving distracted while using mobile devices. I'm also the advocacy and outreach director with African American Women Trucking Association. We call it ATA for short. I'm also a mom, a wife, a grandmother, and a survivor of distracted driving. On October 17, 2012, I decided to get in my Toyota Highlander and text my daughter about her cell phone bill. It was due that day, and she kept texting me, "Mom, pay my bill, pay my bill." I kept texting her back, "I'll pay your bill when I get ready." I was on my way to an outlet mall. I lived in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I was traveling to Durham, North Carolina, which was going to be about an hour drive. So in this drive, like I said, she texted me, I was texting her back, looking down, looking up. I looked up, I saw sparks popping in the air, and I figured I wasn't gonna live. My window was down, I was driving 70 miles per hour. I didn't have my seatbelt on. And besides just texting, I was doing all sorts of stuff in my car. I was eating, I was drinking, I was messing with the radio. I even, at this time, it was October 17th, a star had fell out the sky and I followed the star until it burned out. I was so distracted. But in this moment of distraction, like I said, I looked down, I looked up for the last time, hit the overpass. I was thrown forward, I bumped my head, and I asked God to please don't take me like this. And I thought about my children. When I released from the underpass, I hit a car that was traveling on the highway beside me with two people inside. All three of us ended up at the hospital. Because of my injuries, my car had flipped several times. So as the car was flipping, I was partially ejected. I lost my ear, part of my face, I crushed my hand, and I have like severe road rash burns to over 8% of my body. They took us to the hospital, they stopped the bleeding, they stitched my lip back on. The people that I crashed into, they were treated and released that night, but I had to stay in the hospital for 6 weeks, and I had to undergo reconstructive surgery for 5 years. Right here, you can see my face, my ear is missing, part of my cheek is missing. And it was all for what I thought was a simple text message. I knew it was banned in North Carolina, but I had an addiction to my phone, so it didn't matter what was going on. I was going to use my phone if I heard the notification go off. And plus the fear of missing out, anytime my phone went off, I was worried about my children and I wanted to know what was going on. So in this time of being in the hospital recovering, I had to figure out what to do. I felt guilt, I felt remorse, and I needed to figure out how to redeem myself. So I started looking for ways. I ran across stopdistractions.org and the Hands-Free NC Law Act that's trying to be passed here in North Carolina. I've testified there to get the hands-free law. I'm always there whenever they need me. I'm there. I've also been a Lifesavers. I went to Lifesavers Traffic Conference as a traffic safety scholar. I've been doing talks. I've talked to high school students, their parents about distracted driving. Next slide, please. So with my guilt and remorse and everything that I've been doing to help get the laws changed here in North Carolina, I created the MAD Method. The MAD Method is a 21-day mindfulness program designed to break the deadly habit of distracted driving. This is what I had to do to break my habit, because to this day, if I hear my notification go off, everything that I went through, I will still want to pick up my phone. I'm more aware now of the dangers, so I don't, but I had to do all these things to break this habit of wanting to use my phone for 21 days. It takes 21 days to begin to break a habit. So in that 21 days, I help you replace the bad habit with good habits like visualization, breathing, exercises, affirmations, intentions, journaling. You do the reflection exercises. I pray. I know everybody doesn't pray, but I'm a person that prays. So I use all these things to help me break the habit of driving distracted. And hopefully everything that I'm doing will help someone else make a better choice. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Tasha.
You're welcome.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Hi, my name is Triny Willerton, and today I'm going to talk to you about the power of storytelling. Like we've heard from all these wonderful people that are so brave to share their stories and change what's happening on our roads. Next slide, please. So as part of it could be me. So I guess I'll jump ahead. My name is Trini Willerton. Like I said, I survived a horrible crash in 2018. I was riding my bike and I was riding on a route that I rode all the time. I had just said goodbye to my husband. We had agreed to meet later on, and I was supposed to text him after I crossed this one particular intersection, which I never got to do because as I was making my left-hand turn, a driver decided to overtake me or just did not see me. I'll never know because quite frankly, the other alternative is that he was trying to kill me, which I strongly believe he wasn't, but he overtook me and crossed the double yellow and hit me straight on. As I flew, all I could think about were my children. All I could think about was what a bad choice I had made because I was outside and how stupid I was. But yet, in retrospect, that should never be something that someone riding their bike outside should ever go through. And anyway, the man hit me with his F-150 going over 50 miles an hour. So in everything that I've studied, I should not be alive. Like Barbara said, I struggle a lot with survivor's guilt. I often wonder why it was me that made it and not, a young child, or when I hear about parents and their grief, I just don't understand. But, I've gone on to establish a 501c3 like Barbara did, and have done everything I can to create resources and just make sure that people understand that storytelling is one of our secret weapons as advocates. So we provide these workshops we've partnered with Melissa Balmer, who is Pedal Love, and she's an incredible teacher, and she's just a brilliant resource for advocates. And so we provide this free workshops every month. Right now, we're focusing on the World Day of Remembrance, which you've heard mentioned on a number of occasions in this webinar so far, but you'll find out more in a little bit. Next slide, please. Like I said, I've been very tenacious and just very insistent on opening as many doors as I can. I've been very fortunate to share my story with people like Shoshana, who is the director of the Colorado Department of Transportation and our governor. This was an e-bike sharing campaign, safety awareness thing that we did in May. And it was just incredible to see how there's so much interest and people are really rising to create change in our state. I live in Colorado. Next slide, please. This was a picture that just represents the passion from all of these people that have suffered the worst thing that you can imagine, but yet are courageous enough to share their stories. We're here in Washington, D.C. This was an effort that was provided by a coalition. And yeah, we were in Washington, D.C. speaking with our legislators, trying to create change. There's some of the people that are on this call are in that picture. This is, again, in Washington, D.C. This is our Colorado team. Next slide. This summer, last year, a young man, his name was Magnus White, he got killed right on his last training ride as he was going off to represent our country. He was the national champion, and he was just an incredible person overall. He was just not an incredible cyclist, but he is a wonderful son. He had a 4.2 GPA. He was like everything, a community member that was just out and beyond. So again, another coalition effort, we put together this ride, which has the same essence as the World Day of Remembrance, in the sense that we didn't only get together to do this memorial ride for Magnus, but we also had very clear asks. I strongly believe that advocacy has to be paired with our stories, but also with action. Next slide, please. So we were very fortunate to be able to gather our people from our community. The whites are right there. Those are Magnus's parents. Our governor's there, Joe Naguse, Shalem Bat from, well, he's not there anymore, but he was the director of the Federal Highway Administration. On the podium with me is Dan Langenkamp. Dan has been organizing these rides around the country. He calls them Ride for Your Life. This was Ride for Your Life, Ride for Magnus. And we spoke together. He lost his wife, Sarah, about 24 months ago. Again, to a driver. She was on the bike lane. It was completely unnecessary. It could have been avoided. And yet here we are, all of us advocating for change. Next slide, please. We were able to convoke over 3,600 riders on that day in August, and for over 4,500 in total, because we had virtual communities riding on behalf of Magnus. And it was just very powerful to see how all of our community came together and said, enough, we just can't bear to see this anymore. And this all came together because the parents were brave enough to share this story and use their story to advance advocacy. Next slide, please. Storytelling comes in all shapes and forms. Here we are at the Denver Capitol. We're advocating for the hands-free bill, and just like Tasha, in unison with stopdistractions.org. Dan flew in from Washington, D.C. He's there, and we were just so involved in the whole process because it was so important to us. Next slide, please. This is our governor signing the bill into law. It was just, it just, senseless acts like the ones we've all endured kind of take a different meaning when you see things come into action. And that's why it's so important for people to get empowered and feel like their stories will make a difference. Individual voices will make a difference. This is just proof of that. This is part of our World Day of Remembrance event. Again, it's trying to get everybody in your community involved and understanding the power of storytelling. Here's our mayor, city council members, the girl with the red hair, her name's Lauren, and she was involved in a horrific crash, and she's been sharing her story. Terry, which is the person holding Chuck's picture on the opposite side, Terry lost her husband. And again, these are incredibly powerful voices in our community that are making change. Next slide, please. That's part of our World Day of Remembrance event last year. Cyclists, all sorts of people came together, and that's what drives change, when the community gets involved and they just don't want to see this happen anymore. Thank you so much. And I'm going to hand it over to Amy Cohen from Families for Safe Streets.
Thank you, Triny.
So we do a 2-hour training on how to engage in advocacy, and that's the first level. And I'm going to do a very high level version of that 2 hours in 10 minutes. Oh, yeah. Sorry, there we go. So Families for Safe Streets, who are we? As Laura introduced, we are the group no one should ever have to join. We all lost a family member or suffered an injury in traffic violence, and our mission is to confront the preventable epidemic of traffic injuries and deaths through advocacy and support. And we use that word confront very intentionally because this is a crisis on our roadways where there is way too much complacency. So in addition to our advocacy, we provide support services, which I'll talk briefly about at the end. And we are fighting for the safety of everyone on our roads, people walking, biking, drivers, and passengers, by focusing on those big upstream policy solutions, primarily around safe speeds, safe roads, safe vehicles. We also provide support, as you see, for post-crash care and really prioritizing those most vulnerable, because if you make the road safe for people walking and biking, then they're going to be safe for everyone. So like everyone on this call, I'm part of the Really Horrible Club. October 8th, I marked 11 years since I lost my son. And like Laura, you get to those markers that you can't even imagine. He was 12, almost 13. Soon he will be gone longer than he was alive. And he was bright, kind. He had a smile that lit up a room. He had grit and perseverance, and he was incredibly courageous. Just a few weeks before he died, he rode a 100-mile bicycle ride all in one day. And at the 75th mile marker, he was like lying on the ground. My husband called and said, I think we're coming home. And Sammy heard that and he's like, I'm not going home. I got this. He got up, he got on his bike. He finished the last 25 miles and he was the youngest person to finish the ride. Think about what he could have done if he had a lifetime to make change in our communities. So this is a loss, not just to my family, but I feel like it's a loss to a larger good. So when we think about making change, we not only share our stories, but we really, in Families for Safe Streets, are very, very strategic about how we make change. You really have to think about what's going to make change in your community. What is the change that's most politically viable right now? Then you pick that change, you plan it out by identifying who's the decision maker, who's maybe, holding it up, but persuadable. And then figure out how are you going to influence that person. And the number 4 is particularly key, given who we have listening on this call. I know that many of you out there are researchers and you work with data and numbers, and we use that data all the time, and we are always looking to partner with researchers to elevate your voices, to share your data and say, yes, this solution that they are fighting for, it works. We then fight to build a coalition of supporters, partnering with advocacy organizations, but also unions, civic groups, schools, senior centers, AARP. Like these are the people, when you get them on your side and they sign a coalition letter and they come to your events, they're going to really amplify our personal stories and really influence those legislators to be willing to make change. So it's really strategy plus stories plus data. That is the secret sauce to making legislative and policy change. So the theory of change is, how are things going to change as a result of your efforts? And, we believe, and I think we have proven, that change only happens when the power of individuals demand solutions, right? That's the confront in our Confront the Preventable Epidemic of Traffic Violence. If you don't push back, change does not happen. So here you can see us, World Day of Remembrance, several years ago, we had probably 1,000 people in the street marching from City Hall to the United Nations in New York City, because it's a local event, but it's also an event that is marked around the globe. So what's power? This is Tom DeVito, who's here on the call with me, our national director, his favorite quote, right? I love this slide on the right, that the graphic, that, a lot of individual people and someone's coming after us and we can't make change. That's not what's going to make a difference. What's going to make a difference is when we organize, when people act together. That's how we make change. So this really gets into the Midwest Academy organizing model, which we are trained in and draw from, that, we can try to help people who've been impacted, which we do. We can try to educate, but it is only when you really engage in legislative and policy advocacy by having vigils and rallies and meeting with elected officials and building your coalition that you really can change that power dynamic and force electeds who may be key decision makers in legislative offices who may not support your change to actually, sign on as a co-sponsor to a bill, ultimately vote in favor of a piece of legislation. That's really what works. So, you win real, immediate, concrete improvements in your communities by giving people a sense of their own power and really altering that power relationship so that people who are fighting for safe streets become, more powerful than the people who say, I don't want to give up my parking spot. It's going to be slightly inconvenient to drive a few miles per hour slower, right? We really push back and say everybody can be slightly inconvenienced to save a life, and you harness the power of your community to push those changes through. So there's a whole list of things that you identify to, what really can make a good campaign. Is it winnable? Do you know who is holding it up? We really use this this checklist for every time we pick a specific legislative or policy change. And I gave as an example, our biggest fight locally in New York City, where we started, was to fight for speed safety cameras. And they were, of course, not popular in the beginning. There was pushback. It was very hard to get that, very small pilot. And then we built a coalition of over 300 organizations, every major trauma hospital, every major union, AARP, all the big political heavy people. We knew that this was something that people would get behind. It was very easy to understand. It was proven to work. We were able to build leadership. So in the same way, when you pick your campaign, you then have to be very strategic, identifying, starting on the left, what is the goals of what you're trying to do? What resources do you have? Who will support you? Who might oppose? Who is the decision maker? And only then, for those of you who are advocates on the call, everybody's like, I want to fight for this. Let's do a press conference. It's like, no. Don't go to your tactics on the right until you've figured out everything else. Because it might be you should have that event in a different community, because maybe that's where your allies are or your decision makers are. So, you want to lay them all out, because the actions, the things on the right, should be really designed to influence your decision maker so they're more likely to give you what you want. Again, this is like a 2-hour training. This is the high level version. So you always have to figure out, who is it that you're going to focus on to convince them? Which elected official are you going to try to convince to support your legislation, whether it's lower speed limits or speed cameras or fixing the 15 most deadly intersection, right? You always want to try to figure out in your city council, your state legislature, who's supportive, who's opposed, and who's on the fence. And you do want to help your supported people be more energized, but likely you're not going to convince the people who are strongly opposed. They're kind of a waste of your time. You want to focus on who's on the fence and how can we win them over. Because if someone's dead set against you, you're investing a lot of energy and won't be successful. So again, coming back to the data, I can't thank you enough for all of you who do research in this field. It is so critical to help us fight for change, right? We share our stories, but we couple it with data. We are a data-driven organization, and that is what helps us be successful. I talked a little bit about coalitions before and how critical they are, because even if we collect up every voice of people who are personally impacted, if we don't have community members, organizations, civic groups, schools, other people demanding legislative and policy change around the safe system approach, we will not be successful. There is just an inherent aversion to any change, and to overcome that inertia or opposition, you need to build strong coalitions. So what's a coalition? It's a group of people or organizations that come together for the purpose of gaining influence and power more than individuals or individual organizations can achieve on their own. And as Triny showed you, by sharing our stories, it's incredibly powerful. It can't be the only thing, but stories are remembered up to 22 times more than facts alone. So we take your data and we illustrate it with the heartache that we have experienced, and that's a winning, powerful combination. Finally, be persistent, right? Think of Sammy. Get up at the 75-mile marker when you feel knocked down, because change takes strategy and determination. Finally, just a couple of closing comments is that we have a two-part mission at Families for Safe Streets. We fight for change, but we also believe very strongly that no one should have to endure this heartache alone. We offer a wealth of support services virtually, peer mentoring, post-crash resource assistance, and we now do that in English and Spanish. We have bilingual staff. We have a new initiative I want to be sure to mention. We have an online story map that for every dot, people share their story. And it is an incredible way to honor those people who've been lost or seriously injured, to be a resource for legislators and the media, and for people to connect with us so that they can find us and know we are here. So there's a QR code. Tom put a link in the chat. And finally, World Day of Remembrance. I hope you've heard it from several of the presenters today. It's always the third Sunday in November. It's a UN recognized event remembering those killed and seriously injured in traffic violence, with 3 goals: to remember those we've lost or who've suffered, to support those personally impacted, and to demand action in their name. A group of us have gotten together to provide support to organizations hoping to hold a WDOR event. We have a detailed organizer's toolkit with templates and graphics and tips, and to really make it as easy for you as possible. And the website is there, wdorusa.org. And I'll turn it back to Bruce.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was a tremendous presentation. Also, in Berkeley, we are starting a Street Livability Day, celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Berkeley Barricades, or neighborhood protectors, as well as celebrating those of us who have done research and fight for street livability, including my father, who was killed by a speeding drunk driver a year after Livable Streets came out. It's going to come up on September 21st, 2025. And you're encouraged to, if you can, have a street party, and if not, just take a few moments to appreciate all the work that you and others are doing to make our streets safe and livable. And if you go to the next slide, there's just some pictures of our first International Street Livability Day, right here. Again, celebrating the Berkeley barriers or neighborhood protectors. And we hope that it takes off, something that we can all celebrate. The research, the advocacy, all the work that you all are doing to make our streets more livable and safe. So thank you all very much. So we'll have a time, thank you all for your presentations. We have time for questions and discussions. I think one thing I wanted to mention is that this group, it's been a great group to work with to get this webinar all up and running. One of the things we really wanted to, or we identified, was finding out from the researchers what sort of things would you want us to tell you should research, and what sort of things can can we help with in terms of guiding research, and also in terms of advocacy, what sort of things can we build on from each other. So I think Amy, do we have any questions from the chat?
Not yet. So please put some questions in the Q&A, or maybe some are in the chat. I can look there. No, I don't see any yet. So please put your questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we would love to hear from you on what would be most useful. I guess I'll just start out with a question for the panelists while we are waiting for questions to appear. Is how often do many of you work with any local researchers, and what would make it easier for you to connect with them or do so? And I don't know, Tom, if you want to kick it off, or go ahead, Trini, and then maybe Tom.
Well, I recently got approached by someone that wanted to do a study at CU. And so I think just putting, one of the constant things that I get asked to do is to provide this like matchmaking capability for survivors and people that are working either as researchers or in any other capacity. I mean, I think that that's something that if they knew how to contact people that have survived these horrific crashes or people that have lost family members, I think that's a very useful resource that we can provide, as it could be me and the Families for Safe Streets. But that's one thing that I have found is very, very useful in our community.
And I'll just briefly introduce myself to everyone. I'm Tom DeVito. I'm the National Director for Families for Safe Streets. So we've worked with a lot of researchers over the years. And particularly, since we were founded in New York, a lot of New York institutions, NYU, Columbia, the CUNY schools. I would say there's a couple of kind of areas of research that I think would be really interesting. I do see Chris Cherry in the chat, or not in the chat, but like in the attendance. I've read a bunch of your studies kind of on e-bike safety and things like that. I think there's a lot of kind of at the local level, a lot of provincialism that comes, studies done in Europe that how do we know that they apply, to New York or elsewhere in the United States. I think the more that we can, when we're trying to influence US decision makers, even if it's methodologically sound to kind of point to Europe, there is still like a easy political, escape hatch for kind of oppositional folks on this stuff. So being able to kind of like point to US examples, bike share systems that are kind of operational in US cities, all of those things, I think help us do the work that we're doing in the city councils and the state legislatures across the country. So that's like one quick example. We're also working on a bill, kind of a model of bills, but like trying to identify the worst of the worst repeat speeders, for example, in one of the bills that we're pushing for in New York State. And the more research, there have been some studies that have been done, kind of like, looking into the rise of the super speeder and kind of disproportionate risk that they pose to other street users. But as we are out there pushing for intelligent speed assistance and other kind of technologies to control kind of that like hyper dangerous class of motorists, again, just two examples of things that would be useful for kind of some issues that we're working on right now. So, Amy, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what came to mind.
Bruce, were you about to say something?
Oh, I was just going to mention that I think we talked also a lot about effective advocacy campaigns like seatbelt laws, and I think we should think maybe about having an advocacy campaign around speeding and about intelligent speed assistance, but also getting people to just slow down. And maybe that's something that the group can really help work on.
Yeah,
So
we do.
we hosted one. I'm sorry to interrupt. So it could be me. Just we had a campaign with RTD and with CDOT, and so we had buses that had exactly that message. And my intent was also to have the safe systems approach language be more like something that people would become more comfortable with. And so I can share, let me find the buses, but we had buses, we had bus shelters, we had a digital network that consisted of screens inside of trains. We had digital billboards, and it was very impactful. I'm still waiting to receive the surveys for the post-crash, for the post-campaign, data, but I do have insights for the pre-launch surveys. And it was really, really remarkable that one of the side effects to that campaign was that people were willing to put their phones down, even though that was not mentioned at all in the campaign. It was a really interesting and really positive side effect of this messaging campaign. So we're getting ready to launch a new one, which will entail the hands-free law, to kind of promote awareness, and because it's brand new in Colorado and it'll become the law in January. So people will be aware of what is expected of them, which should be pretty clear, but So yeah, I'll share some of the buses if you can, and just give me one little second.
Okay, while you were looking for that, I know Tasha wants to go, and then Tom on the same question.
Okay, I have more like a comment. With the mindfully aware driving assessment that I have, it's a Likert scale. So whenever I have certain talks that I have, and with the African American Women Trucking Association, I have given out these surveys. So what I have found out is, I guess, like when I share my story, I open up stuff in people to be able to, they talk more freely to me about their cell phone habits. So on this scale, I have like 26 questions. And based on, between 1 to 5, what do you use your phone when you're driving? Do you do this when you're driving? Do you do that when you're driving? And they answer these anonymously. And I asked them based on their score to get in touch with me so we can talk about it. So certain people, they will get in touch with me and talk about it because now they're feeling guilty. I have actually made them feel bad. So now I have to make them feel good. So when I'm talking to them and I let them know and I share my story and I let them know I'm not judging you. But the thing with my assessments is based on what the percentage, the data that I have is terrible. I can't remember exactly. I've given out maybe 180 something. And out of the 180, it's like over 90% of the people, they drive like there is reckless. And I look at these assessments and I get scared of just being on the road. So it is, I don't know. I just wanted to share that with y'all to let you know that the data that I have is terrible with just the 189 people that I've assessed. Is really bad. Thank you.
So I found the photos. Here, I'll share them. I don't know. Can you guys see?
Yes.
So this is one. I focused on children because through research, I found out that people tended to be empathetic towards children and not most other humans. So, we had, and these are pictures that I took, so they're not the best, but I just wanted to show you guys. We tried to include girls, boys, and these buses were running up and down. I'm also on the Transportation Advisory Board, so I was very strategic about where to place these buses. So I had them on our high impact network deliberately.
We have like 3 minutes left, so I want Tom to answer the last question. I think he had his hand up, and then I have one question in the chat, and then we'll turn it back to Bruce to just briefly talk about future webinars.
Sure. Just like FSS, like as at a philosophical level, we do tend to focus most of our kind of like efforts at the policy and kind of legislative change. We are interested, though, kind of in an approach to the education side of the equation that is trying to educate folks kind of on the positive benefits of the policies that we know have the highest impact. So cities, we're encouraging cities, instead of running that campaign, wear, bright clothes at night, which again, like we haven't seen much of an impact or any impact as that is like an effective strategy for reducing fatalities, injuries. But that same city could invest those same education dollars into educating the wider public on the efficacy of road diets, protected bike lanes, daylighting, things like that. Educate the folks on the policy changes that will then hopefully, in addition to kind of all of the campaigning and outside work that needs to get done by advocates in the civic sector and whoever else, but could hopefully lower the barriers that we have to face by providing folks with a baseline knowledge of kind of the policy areas that we know kind of yield the highest impact. So.
Thanks, Tom. So one final question in the chat, which is there any research being done on working with Department of Motor Vehicles, DMVs, and measures those who are still driving, who have lost their driver's license due to serious infractions and still choose to drive to get around? And Tom, I don't know if you want to highlight that's why we landed on the ISA bill. I don't know if there's others who want to chime in.
Yeah, just for folks' background, if you're not familiar, intelligent speed assistance is a type of technology that can be implemented on a vehicle post-market that you can do it pre-market too, but this is a bill that deals with post-market that responds to and sets a cap at the speed of a vehicle based off of the road that it's driving on, and it toggles based off of kind of what the speed limit is. And there's both kind of geo-mapping that can be done from the cloud built into the ISA, as well as cameras that can read kind of the speed limit on signs. And we took inspiration from the ignition interlock bills that have been very successful across the United States. If you have a DUI, you have to have a breathalyzer put in a vehicle as a as a deterrent from recidivism, right? And it has been very successful in doing that. We want to take that same principle, apply it to the worst of the worst repeat speeders. In New York City, we have an extremely kind of comprehensive speed camera system. We know who the worst of the worst speeders are. There are folks out there that have over 250 speeding tickets in a year, in near school zones. It's roughly the top 5% of the worst repeat speeders are responsible for over 35% of fatal crashes. So we have adopted, the same principle. Well, we know who these folks are. We should apply ISA to their vehicles, and it not only blunts kind of their repeat kind of like bad behavior, but it also simultaneously still allows people to get around. So if you need to get to your job, if you need to do errands, get to your place of worship, you're not prevented from doing any of those things with an ISA. You're just merely being compelled to drive like 95% of the rest of the population. This is hardly a punishment. We don't even consider it a punishment. And we do think that this is a smart approach for cities and states.
I mean, because there unfortunately are people who you will suspend their license and they will still drive. So this will
Mhm.
prevent them from still driving recklessly, but allow them to get to school and work and wherever they have to go. Sadly, in this country, there are a lot of places where you can't get around any other way but by your car. So it was because people were still driving with a suspended license that we undertook this approach, and we see it as model legislation that can be replicated in states across the country. With that, I'll turn it back to Bruce. I can share my screen and we can talk about next topics.
And Trini has a comment, it looks like.
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
sorry.
I just wanted to support this work. I think it's brilliant and I think it's so needed. And I also wanted to mention that the League of American Bicyclists works on all sorts of legislative work and could be an amazing resource as a coalition member, Bruce, in the future.
Yeah,
So.
absolutely. And I just want to say thank you to everybody. We're always really interested in getting fresh perspective on what kind of things we should do research on. So before I break, I just want to say, and you can let us know also with a follow-up email or in the chat. But does anyone have any pressing research ideas that they think we should be following as part of the CPBS?
If you could get data on near misses and crashes,
Yeah.
it seems like that's lacking across the board. I can never find.
Thank you. That's very helpful, Trini.
Thank you.
Anything else? Anyone else have any ideas before we break?
I think having economic impacts and as well as costs of, different solutions versus, building freeways, those types of things, I think would be helpful conversations.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Anything else before we break?
Yeah, I'll throw this out there too. I mean, particularly as we start to think about how vehicle design and regulation can move forward. This is kind of touching on to Laura's point. Is there kind of like an economic argument to make for a transition to smaller vehicles that can really kind of like appeal to auto workers and others? Just trying to think about the coalition that is going to be needed to build to change the way that we both kind of construct our infrastructure and our cars. It's going to need to be a cross-sector kind of push, and the more that we can find areas of collaboration and mutual interest, that will make all of this easier.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Anyone else before we break?
My smartphone and internet addiction while driving. I see that as a huge problem. It was my problem. And that's one of the major reasons why I caused the crash, is because of my addiction to my phone. So that would be something that I would recommend.
Yeah, thank you, Tasha.
Thank you.
Anyone else? These are all really helpful. And we at CPBS are really open to hearing any ideas about research and what can help you with research and advocacy. So please feel free to reach out to me and my colleagues so we can help. Tom, I just wanted to have clarification that the intelligent speed assistance legislation you're proposing, are you proposing it for New York or?
It's already been proposed. We proposed it two Augusts ago. Our last year, a big priority in New York was getting 20 miles per hour in New York City and Sammy's Law. This year, really putting a lot of effort into our ISA for repeat offenders bill, and happy to share kind of we have a bunch of documentation and campaign materials that we're happy to share.
I'd be happy to know more about that. Sorry, go ahead.
We really see it as an opportunity for, states across the country to do this. So the bill, a version of it already passed. They were inspired in Washington, D.C. and passed and now funded, and hopefully will be implemented. And we're hoping other states will do it as well. And we're here to support. As Tom said, we have a lot of materials available to make it possible for states to replicate this effort. And I wish Tom was in London, and they're already interested. So we'd like New York to be first, but we're happy to seed the ground to other places around the country or even around the world.
I think it's a really great effort. Thank you so much for taking it on, and it's something we could really use in California, that's for sure. So basically that's it. we're going to have our next webinar on November 13th about pedestrian and bicycle level traffic stress by Nick Ferenchek and Bob Schneider. And then on December 9th, we'll have another webinar on, I'll talk about Livable Streets 2.0, and Wes Marshall will talk about his book, Killed by a Traffic Engineer. It's been a real pleasure to have you, to work with you as a group. Thank you so much for your courage, truly, and for telling your stories and also helping us understand how we can use these stories to help transform our streets to make them safer.